Coming up on this episode of Harmless.
A good commander is not just worried about the cases. A good commander is worried about my people because they are your people. They are under your care. We are very good at just being busy, cover things up, keep the noise going, keep everything happening so we don't have to deal with it. You're not going to improve burying this. You can bury it down as deep as you want, it's still going to be there. I think in the toolbox that I opened up, the biggest help I got was from going in and talking to somebody that could actually understand the whole reason we're having this talk. It is 100% to help you and help you understand that you're not alone. You're listening right now and you're sitting there going, I don't know how I can make tomorrow. You can make tomorrow. You can make the next day.
Welcome to Harmless the Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg, and today I have an incredible interview for you to listen to. The first 3 episodes of this podcast are David's story. I initially got David's story in September of 2019 while he was still on the Phoenix Police Department. David has since retired and was nice enough to let me interview him approximately 4.5 years after his initial interview. I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but I want you to know I named this David's Journey, and I added on there David's Journey through Trauma and Recovery, because Dave has done some incredible work on himself and has gotten to a better place. And I want to share that with you because I want you to know that you can be in the darkest of places and still persevere. If you didn't get a chance to listen to David's story, I recommend you listen to it first before you listen to this interview, so you can see just how badly this affected David. And I'm very grateful for him coming back and being so open and honest about his experiences through his recovery journey. Dave's continued vulnerability and openness about what he endured should stand as a beacon for all of those who are hurting and need to recover. So without further ado, I give you David's journey through trauma and recovery.
I'm super excited that I have the opportunity to talk with you again. The interview that we had, if you remember, was in September of 2019.
Yes.
And you were still on the Phoenix Police Department. You had been reassigned to another unit. At the end of your interview that you did in 2019, you discussed some of the things that could have been done and changes that could have been made. And you had a lot of really good insight, what could be done in the future. So this is 4 years later, a little more than 4 years later since I interviewed you last time. What's crazy for me, Dave, is you've always been a very stoic guy, in my opinion. You don't express emotion like I do. But just the fact that you're so open about everything that happened was absolutely amazing. But I do want to acknowledge that I understand talking about it at this time can bring up bad memories and can bring up old feelings and can be traumatic in of itself. So thank you so much for revisiting this topic with me today. So tell us what's going on with Dave.
The good news is there's a reason for hope and there's a reason for that positivity, and that's things can improve, things get better, but they don't get that way automatically. They don't get that way just waiting. They get that way if you put in a little effort, get some help, get some therapy. This brings on some anxiety for you talking about it. It brings on anxiety for me too.
Yeah.
But some of that is also therapeutic, and as you talk about it and allow that pain, anxiety to come back, it also clears out some of those issues that you have. One of the things that I was told is you're not going to improve burying this. So you can bury it down as deep as you want. It's still going to be there. You have to open that wound up. You have to clean it out. You have to apply some medicine, or you're going to get gangrene and you're going to end up having to lose something. So this is part of that opening the wound again. Clean it out a little bit more, get it a little bit better. But there is so much hope. I really want people to understand, no matter how bad it gets, and it was bad. I was bad. I was not in a good spot. I did not have good things going on. It was bad.
Yeah.
And it can be that for, you're listening right now out there and you're sitting there going, I don't know how I can make tomorrow. You can make tomorrow. You can make the next day. Your loved one can make tomorrow. They can make the next day. But you have to do the work, and you have to get the help. But now things are so much better. I think about how bad it was and versus how good it is now, and it's just night and day. I have since retired from the police department. I learned that, yes, it's okay to be done, but I'm a highly driven, highly motivated, very busy person that likes to be on top of stuff, doing things all the time. So for me, I just had to find another way to channel that energy.
Right.
But other than that, by way of letting go, especially of doing the investigations into internet crimes against children in general, I'm definitely glad I did. It was time to move on. It was time to let the next group in, and the new advancements have come out, making things even better than it was before.
Yes, definitely.
So that's definitely one thing. And then, retiring from the department itself, same thing. Let the next generation go in and take over and do what they need to do. When everybody gets there and they do it, they'll finally figure it out. I don't understand. If the only thing you have is police work, then have at it. I don't want to take that away from you, but it's definitely a positive to get away and get on with life.
Yeah. Yes. Now, you talked a lot about family in our initial interview. In the interview, your first marriage didn't work out, partly because of all this. And then you talk about your new spouse now and how she understands more. Tell me about how much that helps. It's got to be amazing for you to have somebody that can understand that. So tell me about that.
It's a night and day difference. It's important to have a support system, somebody that can take the time to, even if they don't understand it, if they just take the time to listen, it's an amazing thing. I heard something in a movie. Basically what he said was, sometimes the best way to support somebody isn't to try to fix their problem. It's just to be there. You don't need to have somebody that's there trying to fix, hey, what's wrong with Eric? Let's fix Eric.
Yeah.
What's wrong with Dave? Let's fix Dave. No, it's just be there.
Yeah.
And when they ask for help, be willing to do it. But otherwise, be there. And if you have that, it's an amazing thing for people, because that's the first step that they need. They need somebody that's going to be there.
Beth, the CEO of the Innocent Justice Foundation, she said something exactly like that. She said her and her husband have a little deal where if she's upset and she comes home and she wants to talk about something, or if he's upset and he comes home, he wants to talk about something, basically they ask each other, do you want me to fix this or do you want me to hold this? And holding it is listening, right? And they actually communicated openly. I need you to just hold this for me. Just listen. Just like you said, just listen. I don't need you to dissect it and tell me, okay, what you need to do is, or you should just snap out of it, or just don't feel that way. Come on.
When they say that whole, just snap out of it, basically what they're saying is they're invalidating your feelings.
Yes.
They're invalidating the way you feel, and that's inappropriate. You feel the way you feel for a reason, and that's because it's hard for you. And what's hard for me may not be hard for you, because you had a totally different set of life experiences to get to the point that you're at.
Yeah.
So when I sit there and I say, this is how it made me feel, in your head you're laughing going, oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine. Why did that bother you type thing? But everybody's got their own set of circumstances and the way they grew up, and how their parents raised them, how the environment, were they teased as kids, not teased as kids, were they bullied, were they the bully? All these things change your perspective when you get to an adult, and then that changes how you react to the stimulus, the environment around you. You could have somebody, and I think I said this before, you could have somebody the first time they see one of these images, they're like, I'm gone, done, out the door. And I can totally understand that feeling. Did it happen to me on the first one? Nope. Did it happen to me after the millionth one? Yep. What was the exposure rate? Why was it different for me than somebody else? Who knows? But we all get to that point where we're like, done.
Yeah.
And it's not right or wrong. It's not better or worse. It's just you finally hit your point. On the department with major crime scenes, you can be at a crime scene and 10 guys are there and 8 of them, it doesn't bother them at all. One of them is, and then the other one is just freaking out because of what they saw.
Yeah. John Madsen made a comment to me one time when I was discussing my interview with you, and he said, Phyllis and me, we've had very traumatic childhoods. I had a very traumatic childhood, very abusive. Same with Phyllis. Like we already had our baggage before we even got into that field. But what John said was, he said, man, if it could get to somebody like Dave, a wife with 2 beautiful children living in a house in middle-class America, you were living it. And he said, if it can get to Dave, it can get to anybody. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My thought on that is it's going to get to everybody. So I don't care if you had the most traumatic childhood, the best childhood, even if you have good coping mechanisms and good environment for getting this out, the trauma that you experience, because it's a repeated trauma, it will eventually get to everybody. And like I said, is that going to be on the first image? Are you going to get to 10 million images before it affects you? Maybe the difference is just longevity when you have that. And that's the overall theory that we're coming up with, is that what we're trying to say is, if you have a good environment, if you have a good support system, if you have a methodology in place that says, all right, this is how often you guys go to see a psychologist. We want you to go there. Like it or not, you're going. You can put up a fuss or whatever, but when you get there, you might as well talk to them and you can, but just go in and talk. And if you have all those things in place, what we're saying is, we're just trying to, instead of have it 1 lap around the track, let's get them around 4, 5, 6 times laps, 6 laps around that track. Let's get them further. Let's get them further down the road. All this time and effort and energy that they have, all the expertise, let's keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And it will get to everybody. Eventually you should have that, okay, we're hitting the out button, we're pulling the string for the eject seat. We're doing whatever you want to call it. But yeah, eventually it will get to everybody.
That's fascinating, because I just interviewed a friend of mine named Jim Cole, who had very long, almost 30-year law enforcement career, and 20 years was doing internet crimes against children with HSI. And he told me in his interview that he preemptively made an appointment with a therapist about a month ago, because he was like, I don't feel like this affected me in any way, but I know it must have. One of the words that we used in that interview was introspection. How important is that piece, looking into yourself and confronting those wounds and the things that you don't want to confront?
It's critical. It's probably the most important and the hardest thing to do when you're in it and when you're having to get past all that stuff. It's why we drink.
Yeah.
It's why we do all those other things that we know we're not supposed to do, because we're trying to not do that, because it is so painful. It's never an easy thing to look inside, bring out those things that hurt, because the natural thing for people is to avoid pain.
Yes, we want comfort.
We want comfort. We want it easy. We don't want to sit there and have to be in the pain. But there's no way for this to happen without going through that part of it.
Working out, just going to the gym. Right. It's painful to push a lot of weight, and then it's painful. Your muscles get sore,
Right.
But there's no growth
without the pain. And that's how it is with this. And if you talk to people that do a lot of meditation, they grow through the meditation because they take that time to allow their mind to deal with all the things that it needs to deal with. We are very good at just being busy, cover things up, keep the noise going, keep everything happening so we don't have to deal with it. But when you take the time, and that's why it's important to go see a therapist or a psychologist, somebody that can say, all right, start talking. And as they talk, they can ask that pointed question to help you dive into that pain a little bit deeper, and then a little bit deeper, and then a little bit deeper. Because as you do that, and it brings that up, and it hurts, there'll be times where you'll sit there and you'll start weeping because you're going through something, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that.
Yeah.
And you do it there because if you keep all this buried, and I think we talked about this before, if you keep this buried, it will come out at the wrong time. If you're single and you're doing all this, and then you get married, and then all of a sudden you have kids, and you haven't dealt with any of this, all of a sudden when you have those kids, it changes everything as you're doing this job. Everything changes. And you could see that with my old partner, Chris. Single, got married,
Yep.
Eventually had the kids. And that's when it really, I think, started to have the effect. I saw it change after his kids, because now it becomes much more personalized. And if you haven't dealt with all that stuff beforehand, it just amplifies all that you're going through.
Yeah.
So that introspection, that looking in, you have to do that. And even before you get to the point where it's bothering, and if you're the one that you just started doing this, you're new to it, or you're just thinking about going into it, taking that time to just, hey, how am I doing? What's going on in my head? How am I mentally? How am I dealing with everybody else? Am I starting to shut people out? And am I starting to drink more? Am I starting to do things that I shouldn't be doing? Am I starting to change behaviors? What's happening now?
Yeah.
You need to do that so you can start figuring out, oh, I have a red light going on. Check engine light's going on. Fasten seatbelt light's going on. What do we need? We need to get something happening. We need to address this issue.
How do you get somebody to that point? How do you get somebody who, like, you see is crashing and burning, or they're just having a bad day, and they're one of those people that they're just one of those type A.
They're like you and me?
Yeah, like that will just shoulder all of it. What advice would you give them to introspect?
I think some of that is changing the culture, because if we have a culture in place where nothing happens, that's what we had. When we went into this, there was nothing. There was no, it's okay to talk about it. There was nothing, really, nothing.
Correct, yeah.
No emphasis on healthcare, mental health care, any of that. It wasn't there. So the culture was you shoulder it and you continue on. And that has been a traditional police culture for years.
Agreed,
and
yeah.
It's not just police. It was
For time in memoriam,
Yeah.
that's what it's been up
Exactly.
until, yeah.
So changing that culture is the first step. You have to have it so people understand this is going to affect you. In fact, I just saw a thing on the news, Glendale Police Department having a mental health seminar for first responders. It's open to all first responders, free of charge, and their spouse. I think what's been happening is they've seen so much of the oops side of what's happened. Oh my goodness, all this stuff has happened and we never did anything, and now these people are out in the wild without having had anything. So that first step is that change in culture, because if you have a culture that says this stuff is going to affect you, we want to make sure we're addressing your mental health. We want to make sure that you have the ability to talk to people. We want to have EAP so you can get in touch with therapists or psychologists. We want peer counseling, things like that. As you come into the dynamic, if you're going into an internet crimes against children position, if they say right up front, hey, we're a family here. if you see or I see something going on, we'll talk about it. So that's another change in the culture. But being one of those people that sat there and said, I can take it. I'll just keep going. I can take it. I can take it. I can take it. I can take it. The only way that's going to affect them is when they finally hit that point where it's, I can't take it. And it's different for everybody. It's just like the alcoholic or the drug addict. When do they finally kick the habit? It's when they finally hit their rock bottom, and it's different for everybody. I had a friend of mine. He was crack, meth, and did it for years, got arrested, everything else. And we had a discussion. What was it? He goes, it's when I hit my rock bottom. And I said, what was that for you? And he said, for me, it was when I was sitting in jail missing my kid's birthday.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So for him, that was it. For some people, it'll be the first time that they wreck their car. It'll be
right
when their wife leaves them. It will be when they go broke. Some of them, it will be when they die from an overdose.
Yeah.
And that's the only time that they'll change. Or a suicide. Everybody's got a different point. And
Right.
that's the same with the police and anybody else investigating this. They're going to have that point where they're finally going to say, okay, it's enough. I'm ready to come forward. What we want to do is encourage that to happen sooner. If we had had an environment that was more like what you're seeing today, where they have more openness about mental health, where they have more openness about it's okay to reach out, get some help, talk to somebody. Let's prevent you from getting to the point where you can't do this job anymore. Let's keep you healthy mentally so we can keep you working as long as you would like to in this department. And if you decide that you're at the end, then let's move you somewhere else. But I think that change in culture helps lower the hurdle of going out and getting that help for those people that prefer to take that internally.
And support, right? So if we bring in mental health providers, we're supporting people, which helps comfort people.
Right.
And people want to be comforted, but this type of support can also open up, like you said, it can open up wounds. We want to get to a place where we can be comfortable talking about things.
Improving your mental health is not, there's no free pass. Sorry. There's not going to be somebody that can just say, oh, here's some magic.
Here's a magic pill.
Yeah, Harry Potter, boom, there you go, bippity boppity boo. You're all good. It's not going to happen.
You have to put in the work.
Even if you get a magic pill, because when I went in, they wanted me to take some medications to help reduce my stress level, to help basically mellow me out as a first step. And I really didn't want to take them. I'm not a believer in a pill solves every problem. But even with that, it wasn't, here's the pill, your problem's solved. It was, here's the pill to lower that part of it so we can continue to work over here. So you're still having to do something.
So I want you to talk about the catharsis of just telling your story. Is it cathartic to tell it, or is it more anxiety producing? Is it another selfless act where you're going to suffer through this so I can help another person? And they're not all mutually exclusive, obviously.
No.
And I've asked you 16 questions at once,
Right.
so I'm sorry. But basically the point is, let's discuss the catharsis of talking about it.
As you discuss this, and it's got to be in the right circumstances. So you can't sit there and just start talking about this to somebody who has no idea what you're going through. A prime example, your significant other or spouse. If you start trying to just be open and tell them everything that's going on, they're going to all of a sudden, their eyes are either going to bug out of their head or glaze over, one of the two.
Yep.
They do not understand. You have to be in the right environment. But when you open and start to talk, you're open, you start talking and revealing how this is affecting you, which is not an easy thing. It does produce anxiety, because how many people sit there and talk about their emotions and their mental state when they have a kind of job where you're supposed to be able to be Superman. And then at the same time, if you need to be the guy that's coddling the baby to make sure it stops crying, you have to be that person. You have to be able to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to go in and be the one charging into the gunfight, and you have to be the one that saves the person when they need to be. You have to do all that. So how do you find an environment where you can talk? You have to get past that. You have to understand you will have some anxiety when you do that. That's understandable. It's okay. That's normal. But when you open up and you start to discuss it, as you talk about it, you're allowing yourself to go there in a much lighter level than in a therapy session. When you go through therapy and you're talking to your therapist, that's when you will go deeper in, and they'll start asking those probing questions to try and help bring out all those different parts. But as you discuss your story, it does bring up the pain, it does bring up the anxiety, it does bring up all the emotion. And I know for me, it even starts to bring up some of those little mental pictures that you've been working at not having to deal with. All that does come up, but as you discuss it and go through all of it, it helps clear that out again. All right, now we're sweeping those cobwebs off again. We're getting them out, and we're cleaning everything back out. And it helps to ease afterwards. You feel that, oh yeah, this ease things out again.
Yeah. We're still at a point now where we have internet crimes commanders that are offered free mental health training, a day seminar for all their employees, anybody related to crimes against children investigations, and they're turning it down. They're saying we don't have time for it. We don't have today. Like right now, there's ICAC units that are, no, we're not going to take that free training. Nope.
And that's disappointing to hear. It really.
I know. Everything you've gone through, everything all the people have gone through, to have somebody who's in charge that still has that old school fucking tough guy, suck it up, especially with this work, suck it up. And it's probably the same guys. I don't want to see that shit. You look at that. Right. Not me. You look at it. That's your job. And we cannot function as protectors of society if we can't even acknowledge that we have to protect ourselves. It's grant funded. They don't have to pay for anything. All they have to do is have their people away for one day.
Right.
And it's still pulling teeth to get that to happen.
And Eric nicely talked for a while to allow me to get my emotions under control. I appreciate that. That disappoints me to my core. And that's why I got emotional about it, because what that tells me is that commander probably shouldn't be a commander of an Internet Crimes Against Children task force. That shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what a good commander would do. A good commander is not just worried about the cases and how many things are being done. A good commander is worried about my people, because they are your people. They are under your care. And if your care does not address their mental health, you are not doing your job correctly. I'm sorry if this is offending you as a commander that's turning this training down, but if you are turning this down, you have no excuse. You should be relieved of your command, and you should have somebody else take over. Your job is to protect your people, and their job is to investigate these cases, and they can't do that if they finally get to the point where they can't do it anymore. And now you got to bring in the next person and train them. How much do you lose? You're going to lose more than a day. If you turn over one person, because now that new person, how many days is it going to take? How much training do they have to take to get to the point where one of these other investigators are already at?
And that's all it is. It's one day.
Right.
It is awareness training.
Right.
It is talking about what you and I are talking. Like, this can mess you up, and this is the things to look for. And here's how your ICAC unit can set up a framework for mental health support for your people.
Right.
That's all it is. It's all about awareness to get those people who, fuck this, I'm not going to this stupid shit. You're going to this daily, it's just a one-day seminar, you're all going, and they can sit there with their arms crossed, just like going into the psychologist. But they're going to get information. And when you went to shift training, when I went to shift training, we left with something from that.
Everybody had something out of it.
Whether it was super significant or it was just a little thing, but that one little thing can be the seed that gets you started down the road to addressing mental health, your own mental health.
Right. And I think as a commander, one, not only do you want to look out for your people, but even if you're so self-focused as a commander that you're not even worried about your people, all you're worried about is caseload and everything else. Let's say you have a squad of 8 people working your cases. You take one day. So if you look at it, that's 8 working days that are tied up because of your 8 people. It's one day, but times 8. So now that's 8 working days. All right. If just one of those people gets a benefit that from going to the mental health training that keeps them from saying, okay, I'm done, I'm out of here, and it keeps them working for an extra year or 2 or just staying there because they have that support system. That one person that leaves and now you bring in one new person, they're going to have to go through all the required trainings that they have to go through to keep your grant funding going.
Yep.
They have to go through the learning curve of figuring out how to do all these cases, how to interview the people, to do the subpoenas, the search warrants, everything else. You're going to lose more than that 8 days of time just if one person leaves. So it really doesn't make any sense at all to say, no, we're good.
Yeah.
We're going to tough it out ourselves. Goodbye.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, it just really, I can't see a scenario that says we can't afford to do this.
The analogy that I think of is the departments physically protect us, but they haven't been really good historically about mentally protecting us. When you go out on the street, when you and I were patrol officers, we go out on the street, every call we went to, there's a potential for violence. There's a potential, every single call. And that's why we have a gun and a taser and a vest and a shotgun in the trunk and a radio to get help and all this other stuff, right? So we have all these things in place for the potential of violence. Every single time you open one of these investigations, you are encountering violence. You are witnessing violence. You are witnessing pravity that doesn't compute in your mind.
Right.
You are witnessing it daily. So what are the supervisors doing to protect you? It's not a possibility you're going to encounter violence. It's a guarantee.
Right.
So if you are not doing everything you can to make sure that your people are protected, then I agree with you. Like, you have no business doing that job. And being an ICAC commander, there's a lot of one of the problems is there's a lot of turnover in the job.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some people that are ICAC commanders, let's be honest, to further their career. It's a
Correct.
line on their resume. And man, if you're one of those commanders, go somewhere else. Go pad your resume somewhere else, because you need to understand what your people are dealing with. And if you're the supervisor that says, I don't want to look at that shit, you look at that shit. Like, you need to know exactly what's going on. You don't need to bathe in it. You don't need to wallow in it. You don't need to look at it every single day, but you need to know, just like you need to know when a patrol officer goes to a domestic violence. You need to, as a supervisor, to show up at that domestic violence call. If the supervisor has no idea how to handle a domestic violence call, what good is he to the person? Like,
if you're there and you're just trying to get the experience of running an Internet Crimes Against Children task force, so you can say, I ran a task force, we had federal funding, we had to fill out all the grant paperwork, I have experience in doing all that. You could also further pad all that resume by saying, and I look out for my people. I made sure that we had mental health training. I know the importance of if you are now bringing that whole other dynamic in. So even if you are that resume padding person, you're not really doing this because it's a passion of yours. You can still take advantage of getting your people the help that they need, because now you can show how you're a complete supervisor as you go to the next thing. Because if you can show, hey, I do address things outside the norm. When I was talking to Mike Thorley and we talked about it, he said, what are some of the other things I can think about? And I said, what about getting mental health training for spouses or significant others that are involved in this? And I told him, I said, that's a prime example of something that I don't think anybody else has really sat there and addressed, but imagine how important it is, because they don't necessarily understand, why is my spouse acting so weird?
Mental health needs to be addressed first and foremost. Like you said, the people need to know going into this position, and the supervisors all the way up to the command level, because when we use the term ICAC commander, realize that's a position, the title commander is deemed by the ICAC task force. Within your department, you don't necessarily have to be the level of a commander. I know someone who was a commander that was a detective. I know commanders that are sergeants. The Arizona Internet Crimes position is a sergeant's position, but they're called commanders. So you can see how people might be drawn towards, hey, I'm just a sergeant, but I can get this position, commander, blah, 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 blah. I just can't express enough how important I believe it is that, A, the people going into it know exactly what they're getting into.
Yeah.
And B, once they know exactly what they're getting into, they know that they're going to be taken care of and they're going to be supported because of the unique nature of their job. Now, you mentioned bringing in family as well, and I absolutely love that idea. And you mentioned in our interview about having a get-together with the families and then having a breakout session. What a fantastic idea that would be. Just imagine having a 2 hour, 3 hour, whatever, half-day course for family members, free of charge. However, it could be online or whatever, but the family members now learn what their spouses are going through, and they don't have to learn it directly from their spouse in a traumatic way.
Right.
You know what I mean? They don't have to learn about it in an argument. You disgusted your spouse accidentally, or you completely, like, it can be done in a thought out manner.
And it helps them understand, and it's super critical for your significant other to have some kind of understanding of what you're going through. And that's hard to do in this position. You don't go home and discuss what you did and what you saw. It's not like working at a garage. Oh yeah, I had the jack went out and the car landed on my foot. You don't have something that you can discuss like that. But it's also, it impacts the kids a lot too. I know me personally, I had to push myself to allow my kids to have a normal childhood, because the easy thing to do is to pull them as close as you can to yourself and protect them by, you're never allowed to be away from my eyesight. You can't go out and do this. You can't go to sleepovers. You can't go to this person's house. You can't do that. It's very easy to default to that. And
so many people do too, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
So many people do.
And I think even having the kids have something that says, hey, just so you understand, they're not trying to be that way. Even if the spouse is the only one that gets that, to understand, okay, why is he or she so protective of the kids now?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So they understand that's a normal reaction. It's just, you've seen something that you are like, I am not going to let my kids have that happen to them.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about the steps, making sure that they understand before they go in, and then they're going to be supported. I think the next step in those would be making sure that they know exactly how to get that support, and that it's very easy to do. Because that's something that I've talked to other people, not necessarily in internet crimes against children, but in other areas where they were like, I just didn't know how to get the help.
Yeah.
So just making sure that not only do they know that, yes, you are going to be exposed to it before you go into it. When you're in it, you have that support, but let's make this super easy for you to get the help. And even if it's just a poster on the wall that says, here's number 1, you can go to this website. Number 2, you can call EAP. Number 3, you can, all these different resources. So they just sit there and go, oh, I came in 5 minutes before everybody else. There it is.
Yep.
Type it onto the computer and boom, they're starting to get whatever they need.
Yeah. I want to unpack the concept that you brought up a little bit ago. Let's unpack this concept about having to fight against overprotection of your children. I love the fact that you say that. I had to do the same thing. I think the only way you can do that is if you can understand that your perspective is skewed on the world. It is a wonderful world out there. What's your thought on that?
As you were talking about, our viewpoint is skewed. The prime example, and I might have used this before, if you go into a room full of internet crimes against children investigators and say, Boy Scout leader or Cub Scout leader, what do you think?
Yep.
What's the answer? No, that's a pedophile that's
Yep.
just trying to get around kids.
Yep.
Okay, you go to a bunch of Forest Service people and say, Cub Scout leader, Boy Scout leader, what do you think? They're going to say, that's the guy that's going to get everybody lost in the woods.
Yep.
Because he's an idiot.
Yep.
What's the difference? It's the perspective. It's what you've been around. It's what you've
Yes.
seen. And
Yeah.
because of that, you have a very skewed outlook. If you look at when do police show up? When do we get called? When do we show up and
It's
and
the
do
worst
people-
moment of your life.
It's when everybody's going through A, they're doing something they're not supposed to be, and we caught them doing it, or B, they're the victim of something horrific, and now we have to be there.
Yeah.
It's not like we see the best of everybody all the time. We see the worst all the time. That's what happens. And because of it, we get a very skewed look at the world. We start to think everybody is bad.
And then how many times, Dave, have you been doing an investigation and you pull up the guy's MVD photo and one of the other detectives is, yep, he's a pedophile. For sure he's a pet. Like you just got the subpoena back and now you have his MVD information and it's and even you were like, yeah, he does look like
the
a
guy.
Yeah, because you're
But how many times you find out, okay, there's 8 people living at this address.
yeah, and it wasn't him. Yeah.
And you're sitting there. But how many times out of those 8 they go, that's going to be the suspect, and then
Yep.
that's the suspect.
Yeah.
It happens. You start to get this. Okay.
The only word I could use to describe it is excruciating that I sent my, at the time, 15-year-old daughter to be an exchange student in Sweden for a whole school year. And you want to talk about anxiety inducing.
Oof.
Like I sent her all the way across the world. And while she was over there, she had to switch from her initial host family to another host family because they weren't getting along well. And my ex-wife and I were going through some really bad personal struggles at the same time. But just sending her, you have no idea how, like, I told myself, and I think the only reason I was able to do it, not the only reason, but one of the reasons I was able to do it was I had traveled around the world. I'd been to Sweden before. I'd been to Scandinavia.
Right.
And I very much liked their culture and I knew their people. And Zoe picked Sweden. We asked her what country she wanted to go to, and she said Sweden. And I think me having been around a couple different countries in the world helped me be okay with, because when I was a kid, like my mother was a helicopter mom. We were so sheltered, we didn't get to do anything. And I told myself, because I was doing crimes against children before Zoe was born, was I am not going to put my baggage on my daughter. I'm
Right.
not going to put all this shit that ICAC did to me. I'm not going to put it on her. I'm going to address it, but I don't need to put my perspectives, and every time I see an old man holding a young girl's hand, I think he's exploiting her or he's taking
Right.
her to abuse her. I don't put that on her, and I want her to experience the beauty of this world.
Right.
Because it's beautiful. It's a
Right.
beautiful world.
And part of being a good functioning adult is having experiences as a child, which you can't have when you're totally isolated and protected the entire time.
Yeah. My daughter, real quick, my daughter went to visit a friend in Malmo, which is a 2-hour train ride from where she was staying. And she was going to stay the day and then go back on the last train. So she's going to hang out the day, go back on the last train. Last train got canceled. So here's my daughter, 16 years old. She's in Malmo, Sweden, 2 hours plus from where her host family is. And she figured it out. There was no more trains. She had no place to stay. She figured it out. She called her friend, called her up, and took care of everything. And how many 16-year-olds do you think you could just slap into that situation and they'd be like, I'll figure it out? And she had to, because there's no choice.
Right.
And I want my daughter I want her to experience the world not through my lens. I wanted her to experience it through her lens. When we fail to understand that our perspective on the world is skewed, because I think a lot of people don't realize how skewed their perspective. Like, they don't understand that not everybody is bad.
Right.
There's cops out there right now that they're suspect of everybody.
Right.
Everybody and anybody and everybody, and it's so unhealthy to do that. It screwed us up enough. We don't need to pass that on to our children, right? I think what you said earlier was really interesting about it changes you when you have children doing this job. So there's basically two kinds of investigators or two kinds of people doing this job, ones that have kids and ones that don't have kids.
Right.
Between the time I was an investigator and I went to computer forensics, my daughter was born. And yeah, my daughter was born. I had two older stepsons, but I didn't have my daughter. Then when I went back as a computer forensics examiner, I had my daughter. And you're totally correct. It changes you.
Right.
Especially when you see an image that strikes a chord with you. I had that happen one time, and it was I'll never forget it. It was an image. It was like a photo strip of 6 different images of a young girl performing oral sex on an adult male, close up, and she looked like my daughter. Like, that girl looked like my daughter, and I remember I just completely lost it. I threw my headphones down on the desk. I ran outside. I called my wife, and I was like, she's like, what happened? Are you okay? She thought I had gotten into a car accident.
Right.
She thought something horrible happened, and I told her that
something horrible did happen.
Yeah, something horrible did happen.
It was a mental crash.
To this moment right now, I can still see that 6-frame image, and I'll never forget it. The color outfit she was wearing, how her hair was done.
Yeah.
Because it hits home when you've got children.
As a parent, your role to bring them up,
Yeah.
to raise them to be independent so they can go out and be an adult.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when you say protect them, you're talking the overall, I'm not going to let you go so far off the rails that you're putting your life in danger.
Yeah.
I will let you learn the hard way sometimes and fall and hurt yourself. I'm going to let you go onto the wall that's a foot high and that's too skinny and wobbly that you shouldn't be on. I'm going to let you do that just so you can realize you're going to fall and it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you do that on the edge of a roof that's 30 feet in the air, because that would be endangering your life.
Right.
There's different ways to teach. I'm protecting you overall, but still allowing you to grow. And that makes sense to me. You're protecting them in a sense that you're not going to let them get too hurt, but they still need to learn. There's still going to have to be some pain. You can't go out with that. You can't date anybody because they're going to break your heart.
Yeah.
You're going to date somebody, they're going to break your heart. I'm here to protect you from them hurting you physically.
And support you when they do break your heart,
Right.
and be there as a support system. It's a correlation with that position, being an internet crimes investigator. Like, if you need to know that if something goes haywire, you can talk to your boss and they're going to understand.
Right.
They're going to understand. And if they don't know what you're looking at, then how can they support you if they don't even know what you are doing? Not just what you are doing, but what this does to you. And another thing that a lot of people don't contemplate, and we mentioned this in the earlier interview, is that you don't just look at, it's not like you watched some a 30-second clip on YouTube and it was horrifying. Like no, you're seeing it day in and day out. You're studying it. You're
Right.
analyzing it. You are documenting it. You are doing all this stuff. And if the supervisors, if the commanders don't acknowledge that, then in my opinion, there is no hope, because we're putting people through the sausage grinder.
Right.
Just like when I said I called a buddy and he didn't want to talk to me about it, there were several people I've contacted that don't want to talk about it because there was no support system back then.
Right.
So they can't go there. For whatever reason, they can't go there. Culture plus personality type plus whatever, they just can't go there. And they fully acknowledge that it completely screwed them up. They're just not even privately ready to talk about it.
That is a tough thing, because even if they are going through a process to get better, I don't know where any of them are on their journey. I don't know if they're starting to get help, if they're talking to therapists, if they're just talking to some peers. I don't know where they are in their journey, but it will take them time to get to the point where they can finally talk about it, maybe to other people. And everybody's different. Some people will be able to talk to you about it at any point of their journey. Others, it's not going to be until they get to the end where they feel they've gotten past it. They've gone through the bulk of it. There's just the minor things that they're dealing with afterwards.
Yeah, one of the comments I heard from one of the people was, I just want to put that in my past.
Right.
I just want to put all that behind me. And how tragic is that, Dave? Even for you personally, to have to put that kind of police work, amazing, world-changing, life-changing work, you have to close it off. Instead of being proud of it and thinking back on your career, we do that just as human beings, as retired cops. We think about the fun jobs we did. We think about all this. But the most important work that you and I did in our police careers, and I think you would agree with me, is crimes against children work.
Oh, yeah.
And how tragic is that to have to block that out? That's terrible. We can't have that. It's not fair. It is not fair for society to agree to let you do that job and then leave you hanging, basically.
Yeah. And one of the good things I would say is when you've gone through and addressed all of those issues, as you go through your catharsis, as you go through your therapy, as you go through and have that introspection and learn to deal with all that stuff and, feel the pain and go through the stages of grief. That's basically what you're going to be doing. You're going to go through those stages of grief. As you go through that, when you get to the other end, and it's like grief, when somebody passes, it's hard to think about them and even good times, bad times, everything. It's hard, but as you go through that grief process, you eventually get to the point where you can smile and laugh about some of the things that happened and be proud of the time that you had together. And it's the same with this.
Yeah.
As you get through the processing of all the stuff that's gone on and everything else and how it's affected you, and your mental health is getting better and everything else is improving. As all that happens, you start to think a lot more about, I like the fact that I did that. I like this case right here. That one I'm
very proud of.
Yeah, I got my hat hung on that one.
But what we do is the opposite, right? We're like, we focus on that one that was, we fucked that up, or I did this wrong, or, oh my God, I can't get that video out of my head, or whatever.
Yeah.
We focus on all of that. I can't imagine. I mean, I guess I can imagine. I've been through the trauma, but not being able to be proud and have fond memories of world-changing work that you did it's tragic that someone would be in a position where they can't even go there. And I urge you, if you can't go there, realize, just like Dave said, it's going to come for you eventually. You might want to head it off at the pass. So it's probably time to address it. Now, I want to ask you this question, Dave. Is it possible to continue to do this job and stay mentally healthy? And if so, how?
You probably can. And the reason I say that is if you're getting that mental health support regularly, and if it's easy to access and frequent, I think you can prevent the damage getting too far along.
Yeah.
And I guess the best way to think about it is if you get a regular physical fitness checkup, they can start to find things that are going on that, hey, we noticed that over the last 3 years, your blood pressure is going up. It's not bad yet, but we see that it's trending that way.
Yeah.
So let's start addressing that now before it's a problem, so that way you stay healthy.
Yeah.
I think you can do that with mental health too. Go in, you sit down, you're in front of your therapist or psychologist, and they can ask you, tell me what's going on. How is this affecting you? How do you feel when you do this? And as you are going through that, they can start to see the warning sign. They're trained. They see warning signs that the rest of us don't see, and they can start addressing those things early before it starts to root and cause further damage. If you get a cut and you don't clean it out and it doesn't get addressed and it starts getting infected, if you don't do anything, eventually you could get gangrene or something. I think mental health is very similar to that. If you keep things cleaned out, keep that mental health, exercising, all that stuff going on, you can strengthen the mental health and the mental state that somebody's in. And if they have that and they have that healthy atmosphere where they can then know, okay, I need a mental health hour, afternoon, day, whatever it is that you have at your work. If they have that ability to say, hey, boss, I'm going to go watch a movie. I'm going to Harkins or whatever. I'm going to go catch a movie because I need a mental health break.
Yeah.
And the commander says, all right, we'll see you, later, or we'll see you tomorrow, whatever. If they have that break and they have all the other things in place that help them deal with that, I think you could probably keep people doing this much longer because they have coping mechanisms that are strong, that are healthy, and they have ways to work out the things that are wrong, the demons that come in, the thought processes that are harmful or whatever. If they have all those things in place that can deal with all that stuff, I don't see why you couldn't greatly extend the time for the work.
And just as important as extending their life, or if not more important, is setting up an environment or a framework so that when they leave, they are still mentally fit and they can look back on the job that they did and not have that issue where they can't go there. We want to set you up so that when you do leave, you haven't been destroyed. You haven't been completely broken down. And that is all rooted in mental health awareness, in my opinion.
I would agree. And having a good exit strategy available for people, I think that's also important.
Yeah. But I want to get off the heavy stuff. All right. So it has been 4 years since our last interview, so I'm sure a lot has changed in your life. Tell me what's going on. Where are you now?
All right.
What's Dave up to?
Yeah, we'll get rid of all this heavy stuff for now. We'll talk about some good stuff. So things have definitely improved. Things have gotten a lot better. Obviously, going through retirement, that's a big, huge life change. You have a lot of change that happens. So the changes that I've gone through, obviously retiring, I moved to another state. Basically, I'd been tired of the extreme heat and the brown of Phoenix, Arizona. Yeah, it's December and it's 82 degrees. People are dying of the heat already. I think I got a sunburn just being outside for 5 minutes. So it's definitely improved. I got to an atmosphere or part of the country that's much more mild climate. I get all 4 seasons now, so that helps. I have a wife that's fantastic and very supportive, and she has a much better understanding, having a traumatic childhood and things like that, has a much better understanding of what it means to have trauma. So having that support system is fantastic. My kids are grown up, moved out. They're living their own lives. They've got work and everything else.
Has the mutual understanding of trauma, even different types of trauma, strengthened your relationship with her? Do you think it bring you closer together?
I think it helps us because we understand, although her trauma was very different from my trauma, it helps us understand what trauma is. When she's having certain things that are triggering her, obviously because her trauma is different than mine, those triggers are different, but I see she's been triggered and I also understand. So there's times when she gets upset or angry and you have to realize, okay, this is because of past issues.
Right.
It's not this. And she's not mad at me. She's mad at the thing that caused it. Now, sometimes you're on the brunt of that because you're the closest person, but that's not what it's really directed at. And it's just understanding that. And it has definitely helped. I think that's probably a hard thing for people that have been through any kind of trauma is you have to have somebody around that can fathom that. And they don't necessarily have to have been through trauma. If they can empathize, they can understand. If you were abused physically as a child, seeing that is going to trigger you. Or if you perceive something that could become somewhat close to that physical abuse that you suffered, then that's going to obviously trigger you. As long as your spouse, significant other can empathize with that, I think that just makes a huge difference.
I think empathy is the key word there, because empathy is really being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes,
Right.
and to understand their feelings, to see their perspective. Unfortunately, in this line of work, there's too many investigators that don't have empathy. And I'm not talking about empathy towards their spouses. I'm talking about empathy towards the offenders. You have to have would you agree at some level you have to have empathy for they're a human being? No?
I think you do, especially when you realize that a lot of these offenders were victimized at some point in their past also.
Yeah.
If you do enough of those interviews where you're talking to these suspects, you talk to them and a lot of times you find out that they were victimized sexually as kids.
Right.
And it's part of what skewed their reality and caused them to be the way that they are.
I have a theory based on my experience, and I'd love to get your take on it. I believe that there's basically three types of offenders. Two broad groups, and then one more specific. I do believe there are people out there that are truly evil. They don't give a shit about anybody, the world, and they don't care about children. They just want to do what they're going to do. They're just evil. I don't think that's the majority of pedophiles. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot. But the other two groups are, group one is you were, whenever you turned 13, 14 and you started to get sexual feelings, you and I didn't pick. It wasn't like you get to decide what you're sexually attracted to. You just started feeling sexual for whatever reason, whether it was from trauma in your past, whether it was from whatever reason, DNA, whatever. You became attracted to women or men or same sex, opposite sex. And some people, for whatever reason, they are sexually attracted to a prepubescent child. The way I try to explain it to people is imagine whatever turns you on sexually, whatever that is, imagine it was illegal.
Right.
You can't stop. And then knowing it's wrong and illegal, you have to try to mitigate it somehow, right?
Right.
So a lot of them errantly are believing that when they consume the material, they're not hurting the children because they're taking care of it with this photograph and this video. They're mitigating this need or this feeling. Anyway, that's group one that are, they're just sexually attracted to children. I'm not a doctor, but based on my experience and my understanding, my very limited understanding, because I'm just a retired cop, is that there's that group. And then there's this group of people that they start with pornography. They're attracted to young women. They like young women, and they go on the internet and they see all the women and they masturbate and they do whatever they can. And then all of a sudden it gets to the point where
Doesn't trigger them anymore.
it doesn't do it anymore. So they go a little bit deeper. Now,
I've interviewed that guy.
Yeah. And you've seen that. Like, you and I have experienced that. You got to realize when you're going through an offender's computer or cell phone, you are learning about their life. You are learning about all kinds of things. There's personal photos, there's music, all these different things. But you are also, in these circumstances, you are watching that person devolve from regular porn all the way down to, you got necrophilia, you got animals, you got dead bodies. It's just, you can just see it spiral down where nothing gets them off anymore.
Right. And not only that, but if you are the investigator talking to them, you'll talk to the guy that does that. I literally remember interviewing a guy that was in that first group that was, his whole thing was, I'd been sexually molested by my cousin when I was 7 years old. It continued for all this time. Because of that, it locked in his sexual position. That was the age group that he ended up, because it was his cousin was a male, he ended up becoming sexually attracted to boys that were like 7 to 9 years old. And that kind of locked him in there. But I also remember talking to a suspect who was, he was into women, and it had to be exciting, and it wasn't exciting enough. So he started to go looking at younger and younger, and it just kept going down. He said, yeah, and finally it got to the point where, you know, it was more exciting to see the younger kids, and I couldn't fathom that. I just, I mean, my mind couldn't wrap around what he was saying, but
you've seen it. You've seen it in the data and in the conversations. Like,
so that those groups are definitely out there. And when you talk about the guy that's just plain evil, when you go to those internet crimes against children seminars and they talk about case studies, and I remember one that they talked about, and this guy, he was just a pure evil monster. He didn't really care anything about anybody except himself. And it's just one of those things where you hear a story like that and you're just like, oh my goodness, there is no reform for something like that. What do you do?
I had an interesting conversation with Phyllis when I interviewed her, and I told her about my theory on the two groups, and she said that's not all of them. And I said, and we got onto the topic of, and you've seen this, when the offender is a minor. Shut up. When the offender is a minor, right? When the offender is 14, 15, 16, whatever the fuck, right? Or 14, 15, 16 years, 17 years old, they're actually the one who's, you trace the IP address, you get the phone, and it turns out it's the kid.
Right.
And Phyllis brought up a really interesting point to me. She said, the other type, she said, Eric, and I don't remember the exact context, it's in the interview. She said, Eric, 14-year-old girls are not into the same thing that 14-year-old boys are into. When she said that, my jaw dropped. 14-year-old girls don't want to do what 14-year-old boys want to do, and it makes complete sense. Anyway, so back to empathy. One of the things, so I've interrogated lots of people. I've sat in on interrogations, and one of the things that I would say worked for me, and it was an act in the beginning, but then as I did more and more interviews, it ended up being genuine. It was like fake it till you make it. Like the empathy piece, it was all fake it till you make it. Because when I first started doing this, I just wanted to snap people's necks. I wanted to blow their face off. You know, it was like, fuck these guys. That was my attitude. And over all the years, it changed. I got to the point where I would sit down, and from the get-go, I would just take a position of empathy. I would just say, this is just another guy living on this planet with me at the same time, living a different life. He's a human being. Let's just hear what he has to say. And you've experienced this as well. Like, these people have a secret that nobody knows. Not one single person. And the only people that do know are some anonymous entity on the internet, if anybody at all.
Right.
They can't confide in anybody. You can't confide in your mother because she'll turn her back on you. So they have nobody to talk to. Now you're in an interrogation with this person, and showing empathy allows them to have the catharsis of getting that, of actually telling that secret to somebody
Right.
And if you go in and you talk to these offenders like they're a piece of shit and you're the smartest cop in the world and we're going to find you in this and that, a lot of these offenders think they're smarter than you are, and they're very manipulative. But you're never going to ever get them to admit.
No.
And let's be honest, when they admit it, when they can talk about it, they're also going to get help. Like, it's the first step. We used to tell offenders in our interrogations, this is the worst day of your life, but this issue is now being addressed. Unfortunately, it's being addressed in this way. If you just sit down and if you really come from a position of empathy, and you don't have to love these people. Of course, what they did was absolutely horrible.
And it's illegal. Right. There is a consequence to their action that's going to happen.
I am not going to sit here and say, oh, poor this person or poor that person. They made conscious decisions to do certain things that led them to this position. Or they ignored warning signs and went with impulse, and now they're in this position.
Think about the bar that you have to meet to get them to talk, because not only have they not talked to anybody, what they're doing, they know is not only wrong, they know it's illegal, and they know that you're there to get them to confess to it, to talk about it.
Yes.
There's a whole lot of reason for them not to talk.
Yes.
And one of the things that was interesting about internet crimes against children when we were there was we had a very high confession rate. We had a very high rate of people talking to us and admitting to everything they were doing. And a lot of that was, I think everybody there was very good at, hey, we know this is not going to be easy for you to talk about. We know this is a secret you've kept. I remember going in and telling people, you haven't talked to anybody about this.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. You're the closest person to you does not know about this. I said, this is your chance. You can get it off your chest if you want. You can talk to me about it. I said, I've talked to a number of people that have been sitting right where you are, and they've told me, and I said, you're not going to shock me with what you're telling me.
Yeah.
And it was amazing how many people would talk, and just giving them the opportunity to talk. Don't just sit there and throw things at them. You did this, you did that, we have this, we have that. Open and just give them that blank space to fill, and they'll talk. I remember an interview I did. I was the investigator at the time. Computer forensics were being done, but we couldn't find anything that hadn't been already deleted. And when I talked to him, he was very wishy-washy about trying to talk about anything. And finally, I just said, this is what I think maybe happened, after giving him ample time to try to open up. And I just said, I think this is how it evolved. And just based off of what we're seeing on the computer and everything, I think this is how it happened. And you tell me if I'm right or wrong. You're exactly right. He goes, it started out this way. I really didn't want to do it, but that for whatever reason, that's what I was attracted to. I try to fight it as much as I can. I just can't fight it anymore. Then I finally look at it. I masturbate. I do all that stuff. And then he goes, I just feel so bad afterwards that I delete it all, and I swear I'm never going to do it again. He goes, and I stay away as long as I can, but it just happens again. I said,
yeah, that gets back to that whole point of imagine what you're sexually attracted to is illegal.
It's funny you said the thing, because I use that same exact thing when people are like, we can reform them. I'm like, can you be reformed from being sexually attracted? I mean, if you're talking to somebody who's into men, can you stop being sexually attracted to men?
Yeah, just stop.
Just stop right now. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's illegal.
Yeah.
And are you going to stop? No. Okay. If you're sexually attracted to women, and I tell you that from now on that's illegal, are you going to stop?
Yeah,
because we were talking about how much better things have gotten, and we got deep again.
Yeah, sorry. I did. I'm sorry. I got deep. I'm sorry.
Going all the way back to where we were. Empathy from your spouse is an amazing gift. And if you can give that gift to your spouse, and if they can give it back to you, that it's an amazing thing. And it will carry through a lot of tough times. If you've been in a long-term relationship, anybody that's been in one knows that if you go through tough times, it just helps deepen that bond. if you get through it correctly. If you get through those tough times by burying it and not addressing it, then that's when you're starting to drive that wedge in that separates. So I think that's something that people also will need to figure out, is that the best way to get through this is by addressing it, because now you're pulling those things that are in the way out, and then you're letting things heal up together again.
Yeah.
Whereas when you just bury it down there, what you're doing is you're pushing it deeper, which now it's splitting that relationship further apart.
And it helps nobody.
Yeah, and it helps nobody. That has definitely been a big, huge benefit for me. It's been a God blessing, really.
I'm very happy for you. I mean, like, you have no idea how happy I am for you. Is your current spouse, is her personality type very different from your ex-wife, or is it similar personalities, just the emotional piece is there more?
I'd say there's very different personalities.
Very different.
Part of my ex, her upbringing was they never talked about anything that would rock the boat. I still remember one of the first times I met her family. So this is all the way back in college. Her dad worked for GM. He'd been working for them for years. And I go over for a family dinner time. We're sitting there, and they saw that I was driving a little Nissan pickup truck. So the first car I ever owned.
Yeah, not a GM.
Yeah, it wasn't GM. So I was asked, why aren't you driving an S10? And I said, because their transmissions are too light and they break down too much. I need something that's reliable. But I brought up the very simple fact.
Hold on, let me laugh about that for a second.
It's hilarious.
That's awesome.
As you can see, I was very direct even back then.
Dude,
But
that's funny.
because that rocked the boat, that was not something that was ever discussed, because that was, even though they knew it, GM even admitted, we know that the transmissions are too light and it causes problems, but we're trying to keep the weight down on the vehicle, so that's just the way we're doing it. Rather than saying, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That's another thing gets buried. Simple things like that you couldn't even openly discuss in that family. So I think that was part of what kept it from ever being able to be discussed when things were going bad and hard for us, because she never had that model of, being open and having some kind of a methodology to discuss feelings, emotions, right, wrong, how things are going. That was never modeled. So I think it was very hard for her, and that obviously changed and developed her personality into a certain way.
Yeah.
Whereas my wife is much more open into talking about what's going on. When things are going bad, we know it. When things are going good, we know it. It's not below the surface. And I think that openness helps keep things much, much better, because now there's not that buildup causing more, I don't know how you put it, more distance in between, because as you are more fake about what's going on between you, you keep yourselves from being able to address anything.
That's
so you need to find somebody that you're able to be yourself with.
Yeah.
If you have to pretend you're something else to appease somebody, all I can say is you can only be fake for so long before the real you comes out, and then I think things end. So I think it's important to just, you have to be yourself, and you have to be willing to accept whoever you're with as what they really are, not what you want them to be. It is a huge gift. And other than that, it's just so many other pieces have cleaned up as you go through and you're addressing all these mental things. And not only the stuff related to when we're doing the internet crimes, but when you're addressing all the stuff that you had to see just in your regular police work. There's some nasty, evil, bad stuff we see even before we do that internet crimes against children job.
Yeah.
And all that will take its toll. So just being able to get through all of it, it's just amazing how different life becomes when you can not have all those nightmares, when you can not have it as a negative that's always hurting. Those things still come up, but it's not nearly as traumatic for me as it was when they do come up now. So when those memories pop back in, when I see something on the news, when I hear something else, it's not nearly as impacting as it was, but I can still remember it. So that's why I can now look back at my career and all the things I did with a much more positive light. And it allows me to really enjoy the fact that I did all that. Whereas like when I was getting close to retirement, I really didn't sit there and talk much about anything I did on the department because it was a heavy weight.
Yeah.
And that's hard to bring up. But now it's, oh yeah, I did this, I did that. I remember seeing stuff like this. When somebody asked me, oh, did you ever do something like that? I can either tell them, oh yeah, and not sitting there trying to hide everything.
If you could give credit to anything specific for you being there now that you just described, your mental state now compared to where it was, what would you credit? Or where would you give the credit?
So the biggest credit I would give would have been to my shrink that I went and saw.
I'm going to stop you and disagree right now. Biggest credit goes to you, Dave. It goes to you. That's my opinion. Sorry.
I can see where you're coming from,
Yes.
that I actually took the step to do it.
That's the brave. Anyway, sorry.
So yes, in that regard, taking that step is the most important thing. You getting out there and you taking that step to do something is the most important. But I think in the toolbox that I opened up, the biggest help I got was from going in and talking to somebody that could actually understand and know all those mental things that are going on and get me to the point where I could start addressing all that in a healthy way. And honestly, I am so glad that when I was given the opportunity to pick who I went to, that I picked the person I did. And if that was God intervening, then I thank God that he did that. But I picked somebody that had a lot of experience. She'd been doing the job for 40 years. She'd been helping kids, victims of trauma. So she had just this wealth of knowledge that when I came in, she was able to address those things in a way that I would never have known how to do on my own. I could never have done that on my own. I definitely had to have somebody point the way and to dig in and do all that stuff that isn't fun and show me that there's a reason. And that was one of the things that she was honest. It's not going to be easy to do this that we're going to do today. You're not going to like it. We have to bring this up. And she would make me bring up really hard stuff. But by telling me that there was a reason for it, explaining it, and then doing it, that helped the healing. And it's just one of those things that when you look at it, no amount of peer support, no amount of doing things on my own, no amount of anything else would have gotten me to the point where she did. So I'm very thankful that I had the psychologist that I had help me out, because it was definitely life-changing for me. How did I get in touch with her? I contacted our EAP, and it happened to be that the EAP person that I talked to was Darcy Nielsen, who was a former Internet Crimes Against Children investigator. So she was on the task force with us. So she knew exactly what I was going to be going through. Here's your choices of the people to go see. And she was instrumental in getting that all lined up. I literally made the phone call to her, and she ran with everything else. I had nothing else that I had to do to get in. Literally, I called her up, and honestly, I just called the employee assistance. I did not call her specifically. She just happened to get the call.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And
that's great.
And she took care of everything. And even making sure that I understood this, you have this many hours that you can take off to go and do this. You have this much time. You have all this that you can do. Your boss has to allow this, making sure that all the paperwork got done all the way around. So I didn't even have to do any paperwork. I don't think I even signed anything when I went and got all that stuff done. She took care of everything.
Oh, good for her.
So
let me ask you this, Dave.
help.
Was there any point after you addressed this where you were going through your healing and you wanted to stop? Did it ever get to the point where it was almost, or it was too hard to take?
Oh yeah. And that's when you're going through it, it's not going to be easy. It's a very hard process, but the pain is part of the healing. You talk to anybody that's been the victim of a severe burn, ask them how much it hurt to go through the healing process, because they have to rip those bandages and scrub it clean and let it heal up. You're doing the same thing, but mentally. And it's hard for people to understand, because you can't look at somebody and go, oh yeah, I see on your head you've got a really bad mental state right now.
Yeah.
You don't see that. Yeah. It's not there.
Yeah.
It's much harder for people to understand that you're going through something. And what we talked about in that last interview, we talked about how when I left and Phyllis came over and she was crying, and I basically didn't understand that she wasn't crying because I was leaving. She was crying because she knew exactly what I was going through, because she was there. She was in that state.
Yeah.
I didn't see it because I couldn't see the injury. There was nothing different you could see about her.
Right.
And because I was in that state that I was in, I couldn't understand that she was in that too. Yeah, you're not going to have an easy time going through it. As you're delving into all this, there's going to be times where you're going to be like, yeah, I think I'm just going to stop. If you do, you're stopping that healing process. You need to commit. And it's just like if you're trying to work out for some physical event and you pull a muscle.
Like a marathon or something. You can't just,
if you pull a muscle, you've got to do what you can to let that heal, and then you got to get back into your training so you can do whatever you were trying to do.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, and it is a tough mental workout.
How long of a process was it for you, do you think? Ballpark, from the time you called and spoke to Darcy until you got to a place where you could recall the images and memories and they're not so impactful anymore?
It took a while. I tell people that my psychologist was able to get me in 12 weeks, so I stopped having flashbacks. That's 12 weeks, 3 months to get to that point.
Wow.
And then I would say it was probably a couple years plus before I was actually able to sit there and go, all right, I'm more comfortable with it. And then, let's see, because trying to think when I left doing the computer forensics, I would say probably a good 5 years before I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm much better about it.
Yeah.
It definitely took a lot of my life. It does. It'll rob a lot of your life. Address it early. When you start feeling those things, you got to take it as fast as you can, or as early as you can, because that's how you're going to avoid having the issues that I had, which take years to undo.
Yeah.
You'd almost have to say that it'll take almost as long to undo as it took to do.
There's just so many steps they could have had in place as a part of the interview process. This is what you're going to be dealing with. Here's some sample imagery, maybe some erotica type things.
Yeah.
This is what you're going to be dealing with.
Now,
Now,
read some descriptions to them so they know what they're going to see. Somebody can tell you, oh yeah, you're going to have to see images depicting the sexual exploitation of a minor. That doesn't tell you, but if you read a description that says, okay, you're going to be looking at things like this, and it's a video that lasts this long, it depicts, and you read through what we did with a grand jury. Yeah. We read a description, because if you can read a description to a grand jury that makes them throw up, you pretty much know that all you have to do is describe these well enough, and they can make that decision. Do I think I could actually look at that and not have some major problem?
you give them the ability to make an informed decision. They get to think about whether or not they're going to do the job. But then you also, in the same token, or maybe as a part of the process, explain to them, this is what you're going to be dealing with, but this is the special support we have if you do decide this is the kind of work
Right.
you want to do. I think something like that is hugely important. Like you said, having these things in place can extend the life of the investigator, which the department benefits from, society benefits from, the world benefits from. But again, with me is, but what I don't want to have happen, Dave, is I don't want to have Dave go 5 years and then when he leaves, he's completely mentally trashed. And then Bill goes 8 years. We extended his life, but he's still mentally trashed.
Right.
And this person did it 15. That's not what I want.
When they get to the end, they're healthy. They're good as they leave.
Because I always say, I believe everyone has an expiration date when it comes to looking at this material. And I absolutely feel that whether your expiration date is a week, a year, 30 years, when you leave, you are not in a place where you can't even think about it.
And that's the hard thing. That's almost like the Minority Report. You've got to look at it and say, all right, we know that if we have Jim do this and for 3 years, he'll be good. But if we have him do it for 5 years, he's not. So when Jim gets to 3 years, we're just going to kick him out.
Yeah.
But what you can do is if you have all the mental health stuff in place, maybe part of that is there's a feedback, that mental health provider that says they're at a yellow light. We're starting to see some warning signs that this might be affecting them. Maybe it's time to either give them a break, let them go somewhere else for a while, or maybe it's time for them to transfer out, find another place for them to use their skills, and give them enough time to find that, whatever it is. Whereas when they get to the point where I wasn't even at a red light, let's put it this way, I was at a black light.
You were passed out behind the wheel in the middle of the intersection, basically.
It was way bad.
Yeah.
If you get to the red light, that's when you should be saying, okay, we're transferring you to someplace else.
Yeah.
So when you get to that yellow light where the provider's like, hey, I'm starting to see signs that make me think we need to give them a break, or maybe it's time for them to start transferring out. Have a scale that they can sit there and report back, and they're not giving any details. They're just saying that, okay, based off of everything else, we're at a yellow, we're at, 1 to 10, they're at a 3 or a 5 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think that would be the only way that I can think of, because you'd have to have some way to get a picture of their mental state to know when is it time for them to go.
Yeah. It's also incumbent upon the investigator themselves to be open enough to accept if you can't introspect and look at yourself. And when someone tells you, I'm seeing this in you, you have to be able to say, thank you, not fuck you.
Right. Or even if they say that and you go, I don't see that myself, but let me take the time to look at it. Maybe if I take a little more time, maybe I will see that, oh, hey, they are right.
Because I have a sneaking suspicion that anybody that would respond to that and put up a defensive wall, myself included, millions of times in my life I've done this. You immediately put up the defensive wall in response, but then you go home or wherever and you got a quiet moment, and what are you thinking about? You're thinking about that.
What was said to you.
Exactly.
Which is the whole thing about the shift training.
Yes.
You had to go to it, and even if you put that wall up,
Yep.
something came back with you when you did it. Same thing with this. If somebody confronts you with it, something's going to happen. Something's going to stick. It's going to go through your mind.
And even if it's yourself confronting you, like even you get to the point, like you said, the rock bottom thing, where you recognize, because your friend, that he recognized that inception was from his own mind.
Right.
Because of his circumstance. So it doesn't necessarily require somebody else telling you, but if somebody else tells you, you should treat that exactly as if you're telling you. That's where I believe we need to be.
Yeah, internalizing that advice.
Exactly. Listen, yes, the generation we grew up in, it's, oh, boys don't cry. Men don't show emotion. And unfortunately, emotion is so intertwined into this type of investigation.
Mm-hmm.
How much emotion is wrapped up in an auto theft case?
Exactly.
It sucks. It's terrible for whoever got the car stolen. I've had my car stolen. It's a terrible experience. And it was emotional, but it is inextricably intertwined with investigations involving the exploitation of children.
Yeah.
And you can't just put a blind eye to the emotion side of it. You cannot. And that's what we've done, or that's what we've been doing.
Thinking about that made me think back to that protecting. You're talking about protecting Zoe.
Yes.
Protecting your daughter.
Yeah.
Because as a society, we protect our kids. That's one of the things that society tries to do. Think about it. We have an entire department that's just child protective services. That is their job, is to protect children.
Yep.
Because it's hard for them to voice what's going on and get help, because people don't always listen to the kids. People think so. So as a society, we know that it's so important to protect our kids that we have several steps in place. I mean, look at kids now. If a teacher says, I think, this child is being abused or neglected or anything else, they can then report that and it gets investigated. That's how important it is to protect our kids. And society has that weight. Because of that, it makes it that much more important for everybody. And then the people doing these investigations, it's that much more important to them too. So you really invest yourself into these kinds of cases because of that.
Thank you so much for still being willing to talk about this. I don't know what it's like to have gone through what you've gone through, but I do know that what it feels like to have this stuff come back up again. The whole point of this is to help somebody.
Right.
If this podcast goes out and one person puts down the gun or doesn't take the pills,
Finds the help.
Or doesn't
Saves one marriage.
Yes. Then it's worth it.
And I can say that you can probably look at this as your second most important job that you're going to do. Your time working internet crimes against children is probably your first. You can probably say that this will be your second. And I bet at some point in time, you might, if you find out what all this can do, you might even end up saying that this is going to be your most important work.
Oh.
Because if you can help people that are doing this kind of investigation, if you're going in and having an impact there, then it's an amazing gift to do something like that.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that. That's the whole idea. Is I want to make sure that you can have a legacy, and it's not a painful one. You can have you can have a proud law enforcement career legacy that you're proud to talk about, and it's not traumatic to talk about. It's not traumatic to think about.
Right. And I think you and I both agree wholeheartedly that for you listening, our heart, our passion right now is your health, your mental health. You need to understand that the whole reason we're having this talk, it is 100% to help you and help you understand that you're not alone. You're not the only person going through it. You're not the only person that has had to deal with these things. And there is a brighter future. There is hope. There is a way to go past this and through this. There's a wealth of resources out there that you can tap into for that purpose of having that improvement, or to even prevent yourself from getting to that point where you need it. Where if you're the one that's just starting out right now, talk to a couple people that have been around for a lot of years, done a lot of things, and they're telling you, their advice to you is don't let it get to that point. Start the preemptive help. Go in regularly. Take advantage of all the opportunities you have to prevent yourself from having to be the one that is spending 5 years to get better.
Thank you again, David, for allowing us a peek into your trauma and recovery journey. Your openness and vulnerability will most certainly save lives, and for that, I am forever indebted to you. If you would like information about how to receive SHIFT training, visit shiftwellness.org. The SHIFT program offers a full one-day training for any ICAC unit that requests it, free of charge. We also have several resources online available, like many different webinars and other ways for you to begin a self-help journey. If you like this podcast, please share it with somebody you know. And if you know somebody that needs to hear this podcast, feel free to email me at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.